Welcome to Sundays with Jane Eyre. This is episode 23, The Silent Sea and the Restless Sea, covering volume 3, chapters 5 and 6, or chapters 31 and 32 of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, at the Rosenbach in Philadelphia. And joining me today as co-host is Dr. Hannah Moss. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
Oh, I'm great. I'm very delighted to have you back. Thank you. Where are you coming from again?
So I'm in Derby. So interesting for these chapters because she seems to be in between Derby and Sheffield, for where the St. John household is. So yeah, very much my area.
Excellent. Is that the S stash in this? We think that's Sheffield that happens in this chapter?
I think so. Okay. Yeah. She mentions moving down towards the Midlands, and so Rosamond talks about the cutlery makers as well in the area when she's moved from this S town 20 miles away. So I think she's moved down into the Derbyshire Peak District.
All righty. Well, welcome to all of our erudite Bronte stores and airheads as well. If you're new to the show, just a note on our format. If you're watching live on Zoom, the chat is for you to talk to each other. So please do that. Have a lot of fun doing that. But if you have a question for Hannah or myself during the show, put it in the Q&A function on the Zoom interface, and we'll do our best to hit as many of them as possible. We're also streaming live on YouTube. If you're watching there, I encourage you to, if you leave a comment or a question, I will get to it after the show. And I encourage everyone to watch that and like and subscribe to the Rosenbach channel. And you can rewatch the episodes there at any time you want. So if you're watching today live and you got to miss some of it, that's okay. It's right there for you to watch the rest of it again. Since it's been a while since you were on, I'll give you a little intro again, or your little bio again for everyone. Dr. Hannah Moss is an early career research associate at the University of Sheffield. She specializes in late 18th and early 19th century women's writing, as a particular interest in the literary representation of artists. So that's great. We'll get some of that today. Hannah credits the Brontes for sparking her interest in studying English literature, completed her master's dissertation on Elizabeth Gaskell's Life of Charlotte Bronte. Hannah, you last joined us for episode 10. Somebody has plotted something, we called it, or I called it. Chapter 15, when Rochester reveals the story of Adele's mother and Jane saves him from the fire when Bertha tries to burn him in the bed. There was a lot there. So if anybody wants, if you want to rewatch and hear Hannah talk about Elizabeth Gaskell's Life of Bronte too, we talked about it on that episode. I am so happy you're back for these chapters.
It's perfect chapters to come back for. There's lots of portrait painting going on. So lots happened in the interim, but
Jane becomes an artist again, right? Like she had, this wasn't, and clearly she didn't bring her art supplies with her, so she didn't have it, but the Rivers sisters provided her with art supplies so she could get back to creating art. And I also asked you, even though it wasn't in the last chapter you were here, I asked you about the watercolor paintings, which fascinated me, and which I had to hit like every co-host on to talk about Jane's watercolors. And I had a question since you're back on today, and it does tie in with what we're doing now, is that Adam, who always has great questions for us, had noted, had written that in Jane's earlier watercolor number 3, and that's the one with the glacier and the it's an iceberg, actually, and a colossal head inclined towards it, white as bone, hollow eye and fixed. And then it's even got it's got a pale crescent, which is the likeness of a kingly crown, what a diadem, which shape had none. And Adam was wondering if that description of that kind of prefigures St. John in this novel, or can really relate to him in some way, and even pulled out other quotes about St. John, like in chapter 30, for it is at all times difficult to break the ice of reserve, glassing over such natures as his. Chapter 33, the cloak that covered his tall figure as white as a glacier. 34, his marble kisses or ice kisses. So he's an icy figure.
Very much so. That's a really interesting observation to link it back to those really fascinating watercolors that are very enigmatic and unusual. from earlier on. That's definitely like food for thought there. And the thing with St. John is he's very much described in reference to art. He is quite a stoic, reserved person in that he tries to bottle everything up emotionally, and in that he resembles a Greek statue in terms of his ideal beauty. So we do have this mirroring of the terminology, like Adam pulled out there with the icy brow, and that's relevant in terms of his personality and his appearance. And I think it's probably a testament to Bronte using either fiery terms or icy terms to define people, and St. John's very much in terms of the icy. And
Mrs. Reed has a lot of it too. There's a lot of ice in her stare, in her eyes. There's a lot of cold terms used to describe her, especially her eyes, I've noticed. I was especially struck with Adam mentioned the kingly crown, the shape which had none, which is actually, death, and it's allusion to Paradise Lost. But the kingly crown clearly for St. John would be this, grand Christian mission that he is on. And he's one that
talks about death a lot.
Yeah.
He's quite a doom and gloom figure with all this.
He's ready to die. He's ready to die, absolutely. So, I think it's interesting. There's part of me, I think I was telling you earlier, that I don't think that it's not as if Bronte, I think, has this in mind, like she's not backtracking and making sure it kind of parallels with him. But, writers are pulling out of their, subconscious, and it's
definitely. And I think there's something in there definitely about Jane as an artist, and that she sees people in terms of their aesthetic links to different works of art. So St. John is very much this colossal Greek perfect statue of a man. That's what's being caught onto there.
I'm endlessly fascinated by the watercolors. It's one of the things I like to go back to and look and see if I find connections as I'm progressing through the book, if I can find more connections with them. So
there's lots of theories.
Yeah, and where they're like the key of the novel, like the heart of, like there's something about them that must. But I also think it's just because of the way she's written them, because they're so, they seem so metaphorical themselves.
Exactly, and with them being so unusual and it being so difficult to sort of pinpoint a real life reference for them, I think that adds to this whole air of mystery, that they must be sort of they are symbolic, but it must be sort of some sort of key or clue to what's going to happen, and whether certain images stand for what could happen in her life if she's sort of imagining different pathways and things like that.
All right, well, let's get into. I wore my Sundays with Jane Eyre shirt today. We're gonna have a special. There's a sale on the rest of these shirts. I'll tell you guys about at the mid break, so stay tuned for that. But I thought I'd wear the merchandise today so you can see it. And I feel a little weird in a t-shirt. I didn't used to when doing these shows. I'd wear a t-shirt, but I always wear a vest. But I don't know. I feel like underdressed today. I'm usually, fully in like corduroy shirts and tweeds, and I at least put my vest on. So there you go. Hope I don't seem underdressed.
You're very on brand. You've got your tweed and you've got the show's shirt.
That's it, on brand. That's what I am. Thank you. All righty. In the last chapter, last two chapters, we're all about Jane with the Rivers family. So let me see if you have any take on this. Jane with the Rivers family, the sisters. It's like they're like the sisters she always wanted. She loves being on the moors. I feel there's a lot of Charlotte Bronte in there, talking about them walking along the moors and the lonely beauty of it all. She's also still pining for Rochester and absolutely admits it, at least to the reader. She's it's not like, well, I said goodbye to him, now I'm off on my own. No, she's, this is still, a traumatic experience for her, really. And then we've also been introduced to St. John in the beginning, and we'll hit more of him today. Very intense, very, very weirdly abrupt and blunt, like Jane. but also like strangely awkward about it too. And he also sets up Jane for this job that we're going to talk about here soon too. So in a way, there's a lot of parallels with him and Rochester in their kind of position in the novel, I think. But anything on Jane meeting the Rivers family and her new identity now? She's Jane Elliott.
Yes, she's. Can you ever sort of escape your true identity? Is she kidding herself and thinking that she's perhaps going to stay under the radar too long? But yeah, it's the saying that she is sort of trying on this new identity for size. Really, with the Rivers, I think she feels like she has found a home and sort of kindred spirits, and really sees them as siblings that she never had. Really has that sort of bonding experience, and it's on an intellectual level as well. And I think that surprises the sisters. Sort of, Diana makes a comment that she's really surprised to find out that Jane can draw so well, and it exceed the talents of what they're expecting from her. She's arrived on their doorstep as what is described as basically a vagrant. She's meant to have no social connections. They don't sort of know where she's come from, what class she belongs to, but it's assumed that if she has no belongings, nowhere to go, that she is sort of at the very bottom of society and is dependent on their charity. So it's come as a real shock.
And Jane had this battle with Hannah in the last chapter too. Like, I'm not a beggar because I wanted work, but and it was Jane is also very aware of her, social standing, and being with the Rivers family lets her kind of reestablish herself again as she is of the respectable class, not, lower class. I mean, we'll even get some of that language here. She's not of these kind of working class, lower peasant orders or whatever language that she winds up using. That's important to her. And which is ordinary 19th century for a woman to be, concerned with this, and for anyone to be concerned with it. But rubs a little weird for contemporary readers, I think, that this is a real concern of hers.
It does. I think, especially as we get onto the start of chapter 31, where she's talking about the children who she's teaching. Yeah. And I think this is a real sort of crux in the narrative that sort of works to change her views on the lower classes, because there are some really problematic descriptions where she's adamant this isn't her, and it uses quite derogatory terms. It's not sort of very sympathetic, as we've seen from her reception from Hannah. It's not a kind of, oh, here's someone that's fallen on hard times, we must help them. It's this could be a dangerous person, we don't know where they're from, what their intentions are. It could be highly dangerous for us to let someone in, even if it's sort of on a charitable basis. And it just shows that sort of anxiety around social class and the problems with sort of mixing with the wrong sort. And is it going to rub off on you? And once you've sort of slipped down the rungs, is that sort of blocked the way to ever return to sort of the higher echelons? And it is sort of a degree of sort of snobbery in the language that she's come from these sort of country house environments. Even though she's been on the margins there, she is used to living in these grand places with a certain knowledge of where she fits in the hierarchy that's fixed in those places. And to go from that, even though she's sort of questionable how she fits in at Gateshead, at Thornfield, she's definitely much the governess. And knows where she is in relation to sort of the housemaids and so on.
And was about to take the next step, was about to become then mistress of the house and mistress of an estate. And and then she had it, all pulled out from under her. And now she's not even governess in a respectable family. We'll get to some of that language too from the Olivers later today. Now she's, begging at the door. And but reestablished now. And let's get into this chapter, the first chapter, and see how she adjusts to this new social position, as well as, other things. Chapter 31, my home then. Oh, and I love this in the beginning too here, because it is my home then, when I at last find a home, is a cottage, a little room with whitewashed walls and sanded floors, containing 4 painted chairs and a table, a clock, a cupboard with 2 or 3 plates and dishes, and a set of tea things in delft. I mean, this is also like perfect for like good for her. Like, she has her own little house. She has, never had this, something like this before that she could call her own. And she is as independent as she can be in her situation.
Exactly. And so even though it is very different to these country house environments she's used to, there is a degree in status that this is actually hers. She's not dependent on other people.
I mean, she is. She's dependent upon,
not. She's got that kind of
and for the job and all. Yeah,
and the funded job. But it's the first time she's got somewhere that she can call her own, and she starts to sort of label all the objects at her disposal and sort of makes this inventory. And it is almost like claiming ownership in a way that she couldn't when she was part of a bigger house environment. That this is particularly allocated to her and for her personal.
Right, and she connects better with this than she did at Thornfield. Like, Thornfield was just such almost a museum to her, and so far away from how she personally felt about how she would like to live. She prefers this kind of austere simplicity. And
there's something romantic about the cottage as well. It reminds me of Sense and Sensibility, to segue on to Austen, in how everyone has this romanticized idea of how lovely it must be to live in a quaint little cottage, sort of sweeping away the actual realities, and that it might be drafty, cold and uncomfortable
cramped,
on some level.
Smokes badly, so all that stuff, but everybody's,
But it does have these aesthetic associations of being quite quaint and nice way of living.
There's a whole line of them. The Willoughby is the whole speech about cottage and and don't ever live anywhere but a cottage, they're.
Which is fine for someone that's sort of rich to sort of say, "Oh yes, I'd love to live in a cottage." But
I would love living in this little rural cottage. I'm sure I would also have all kinds of issues with the way it's built, and dealing with regular everyday stuff. Anyway, she has her little house. It's very nice, and the village school has opened now. And here's where we get this line, and here's how her kind of relationship with now people who clearly she understands we're not in the same class, but we're still together and I have to teach you. And this isn't far from her as a governess. It's just that now it's just taken down a notch. She says she has 20 scholars, 3 of the number can read, none write or cipher, several knit, few sew a little. And then she talks about they speak with the broadest accent of the district. I have difficulty in understanding each other's language. Just that part alone, that's always that's a signifier of class, right?
Very much so, because it is the local working people. It's quite funny when you think about it, with this being sort of set where I'm from, because you think she's not travelled that great a distance in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
People always think my accent's Yorkshire rather than Derbyshire, but in the terms of this novel, it's like a completely different language they're speaking. But it is more that it's the local dialect. It's the working people's language. She's not accustomed to this. She's been not in those kind of environments before. She's teaching the children of the factory workers in this little village, and they've got a very strong regional accent and probably lots of dialect. It's probably thinking of Wuthering Heights, the impenetrable dialect there with characters like Joseph and how
we had some with that. We had some dialect from Hannah in the last chapter, but it wasn't so heavy you couldn't understand it. But it was clearly Bronte's part in saying this is how someone of this class would now speak, and it's different than the educated, language of other characters. So, and it's just that one line of, kind of respectability, that one line of class difference is always your dialect, your accent.
And she's definitely marking herself apart from them, that she's the one that can't understand them. She's this person that's got this surprise education. She's surprisingly well read and knowledgeable, and it's markedly different from
and now we get into the snobbish language here. She recognizes it is, but she's still going to be honest and give her opinion. Unmannered, her students, some of them are unmannered, rough, intractable, as well as ignorant. Others are docile, have a wish to learn, and evince a disposition that pleases me. I must not forget that these coarsely clad little peasants are of flesh and blood, as good as the scions of gentlest genealogy. They have the germs of native excellence in them. I mean, it's very condescending, but she's being honest about it. And she says, my duty will be to develop these germs.
It's quite radical that she's noticing it. She's correcting herself. She's looking back and realizing that she has approached the situation with sort of class prejudice in mind, that, oh no, I've got to teach these people from scratch. They know nothing. And there's been at this point, there'd be a lot of debate going on over how much children of sort of working class should be taught.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to provide a sort of standard level of education, the worry was that you would create really dissatisfied working members of the working class who wouldn't want to go into the kind of jobs they had been. And it's a whole female accomplishment debate, that if you've been schooled in these kind of leisurely things like sort of painting portraits and playing the pianoforte, that you're not going to want to go and be sort of a farmer's wife running the home and helping out in the farmyard. You're going to be sort of spoilt for that, see yourself as too fine a lady. And so there's lots of educational treaties going back and forth over dividing different groups of society and what they should or shouldn't be taught. And so she's very much coming from that background of thinking, oh well, I perhaps won't be teaching them sort of the nicer refinements. I've just got to give them sort of the basics. But then at the same time acknowledging that they have the potential to learn anything or be as refined as anybody else. It's just she's having to remind herself that it's, at birth there's no difference mentally between
and that's what saves it for. That's what saves her for me. That she recognizes that everybody could be. We all have this in ourselves, and it's just a matter of being taught. And this is also very 19th century. This whole idea of even just teaching children, and everybody should learn how to read and write. This is a project of the 19th century. I mean, it kind of begins, earlier, but not in force until maybe it's industrialization that really, spurs it on. But it becomes increasing, and this is the 19th century. Literacy skyrockets throughout the century.
Definitely, and with these being children of the local factory workers, and it's the sort of factory owner that's funding the endeavour, it's sort of very much fitting into the reforms of the time, that sort of putting limits on work hours for children and what sort of ages could be in the factory. And if those rules are put in place, it's like, well, what do we do with them then if they can't be sort of working 12 hours a day from 5 years old? Oh, we can put them into school and give them this sort of moral, religious education. How St. John comes in.
That seems to be the answer that those in power had come up with. Before it was like, well, why bother to teach people like this? What good is education for them? And then their answer becomes, well, it's moral instruction, not practical as much as moral instruction. And then that gradually changes over the course of the 19th century as well.
Very much so.
But now she is wondering why don't you read a little bit of this here? Meantime, let me ask myself one question. And I'll try not to go so slowly through the chapter, because we got 2 chapters in it. They are short, but
There's lots to fit in, yeah.
Yeah.
So, meantime, let me ask myself one question. Which is better? To have surrendered to temptation, listened to passion, made no painful effort, no struggle, but to have sunk down in the silken snare, fallen asleep on the flowers covering it, wakened in a southern clime amongst the luxuries of a pleasure villa, to have now been living in France, Mr. Rochester's mistress, delirious with his love half my time, for he would, oh yes, he would have loved me well for a while. He did love me. No one will ever love me so again. I shall never more know the sweet homage given to beauty, youth, and grace, for never to anyone else shall I seem to possess these charms. He was fond and proud of me. It is what no man besides will ever be. But where am I wandering? And what am I saying? And above all, feeling? Whether it is better, I ask, to be a slave in a fool's paradise at Marseille, fevered with delusive bliss 1 hour, suffocating with the bitterest tears of remorse and shame the next, or to be a village schoolmistress, free and honest, in a breezy mountain nook in the healthy heart of England.
Well, I think there's an answer for the 19th century and there's an answer. And like the way she paints it in the beginning, you'd be hard pressed to find someone say, oh yeah, I don't want to be living in France in a villa with someone who completely loves me. This is, I mean, we have a different set, of morals that, or conventions that we need to abide by, and than she had, and she obviously couldn't do that. I mean, that's, it places her in the mistress category, and she doesn't, as much as she believes Rochester completely loves her, she says he did love me, and she doesn't think it would last if she's his mistress.
I suppose it doesn't have that. They've not sort of been bound together.
Yeah.
Under God's eye, death do us part. She would feel that lack.
She says that over and over again, that he's not going to continue to love me in this way. So, and I don't doubt her in a sense. I think that,
I'd say the previous chapter I was here for was discussing Rochester's mistresses. He's been very open with her about his previous loves. In France, how he kept Celine as his mistress, and a few others besides, and so she knows their history, and I think she would think of herself as in relation to them, and saw that they were sort of fly by night. It didn't last. It was immoral in her eyes. So however blissful it would be for a time, she would be very, very aware that she's in that rank of being an immoral mistress, and it's not something that would last. And she would feel racked with guilt anyway. So
clearly she would too. But with Rochester, I find it interesting. I think she's right, and I think Bronte has drawn his character that way. That I really believe that Jane as a character is right to insist to him that we have to be equal, and really demands that before in their kind of proposal thing in the garden, that she demands this equality because she recognizes in him that if he doesn't have it, she'll just be his mistress in the end. And he also needs that. She recognizes that in him. And I think the character's drawn in such a way that I kind of agree with her, that as much as he is completely in love with her, and he is at the end, and this is, one of those novels that it's only because she forces him to accept her for who she is. And we all know too, he's all about fantasy, and you're an elf, and this is a fantasy world, and he's never grounded in reality.
No, and it is the fantasy that we're seeing in that paragraph that she's longing for, and she knows that is a fantasy and would be temporary, and that it wouldn't all be blissful, and that she can't be sort of too deluded by it.
We'll get a parallel at the end of the chapter with St. John too, which I love. I love how, or the second chapter we're doing today. So I love how Jane makes these. Bronte makes all these connections between St. John and Rochester, and she also makes all these connections between St. John and Jane. And I find it really well constructed, this part of the novel. and how she does that, which is a way to maybe make people more excited to read this part of the novel, because this is like nobody likes the St. John Rivers part of the book.
That's the thing, and I think that's why I've appreciated coming back to these chapters, in that there's so much interesting stuff in there, because it is kind of often seen as a bit of the filler to skip through. It's like get back to sort of the Rochester content, because something's going to happen. She can't forget about him. She keeps sort of thinking about, what path am I going down? Will we meet again? Kind of thing.
I don't know if this was on last week's show I was saying this, or if this was just someone else I was saying this to. But this is something I think I'll bring up again next week when St. John, but just to prefigure it now, St. John is necessary in this novel because we almost have to like Rochester again. Like, he has done something so wrong in keeping, not only keeping, his mad wife locked in a windowless room for 10 years, but to make it worse, he's lied to Jane and tried to trick her into marrying him. So he is, regardless even if you like him, and many of our contemporary viewers don't, even if you do, he needs some redemption. And I think St. John helps redeem him in that.
Everyone hates St. John so much.
Everyone likes St. John. And it's like, here's an alternative. And it's like, no, maybe Rochester isn't so bad.
Yeah, it's like, bring him back.
I think there's some of that going on. And also it reminds us how much of a relationship that Jane needs. And this with St. John certainly wouldn't be the one, but Rochester would. But there's a lot to talk about the next couple of weeks about that. Jane she asked this question: would it be better to do, to be his mistress or to be here? Of course, it's rhetorical. The answer is no, that she's in a better place right now, but she needs something to back it up. And here she's choosing God to back it up. She's choosing her faith here. God direct me to a correct choice. I thank his providence for the guidance. She's grateful for that kind of, spiritual backing to her decision, but Jane seems to need more than that, as she's always needed more. I think
everyone around her recognizes that as well, that they see that she's doing good work as a schoolmistress where she is, but sort of see that in her that there is sort of more to her, or a restlessness that they don't expect her to stick around very long.
Yeah, and unlike St. John, who says he's made the decision to be a crusader for Christ, and so now like everything will be better now. Jane still recognizes that she is desolate at the loss of Rochester. That even though she knows she's making the right decision, and she can even give this kind of religious, spiritual, moral backing for it, that this is the right decision, she's still desolate and knows that and admits that to us. And I think that might mean it's kind of one of the reasons the people that didn't like it, in the 19th century, is that, it should have been enough for her to say, I did what's right and now I'm better. And Jane constantly keeps reminding us that she's still upset about it, though. We get a little Scott here, little Sir Walter Scott quote. The Burns were singing their last strains, and then she quotes Scott: "The air was mild, the dew was balm." Just a throwaway line, doesn't really matter, but it's Scott, and Scott matters in the 19th century. For people that just who read Jane Eyre, don't read anything else, Sir Walter Scott is the biggest writer of clearly the first half of the 19th century, and really, kind of still has that reputation throughout it. Nobody reads Scott anymore, except me. Halfway through Rob Roy right now. I'm reading all the Waverley novels. But it's his poems that she's quoting here, and they were enormously popular too. And the Brontes loved Scott, and we'll get more Scott later too. But she just pulls out just a line. It just for me, it's where Bronte's mind is. And she's thinking it's from The Lay of the Last Minstrel, which is one of those border tales of Scotland. It was Scott's first big narrative poem that sold well. and it's a romance. And so this is where her mind is, as Bronte, and thinking about her characters, thinking about the countryside, which Scott is a lot about, writing about, the land that his characters are in, but it's also a romance. Not a lot to go on. There's no literal parallels with Leia the Last Minstrel and the story, but I love seeing a Scott in there.
It's a nice nod to a sort of literary celebrity, sort of saying, I can quote you and align yourself that way.
And Scott's still important. Scott's 15 years dead by the time this novel is published, and but he's still that well read and that much part of everyone's literary lives and the books that they read. Well, she had, I thought myself happy, was surprised to find myself ere long weeping. Again, she's, she's still desolate over this loss. But St. John pays a visit. And wait, even before then, is that, oh yeah, I love what's the language she uses here about Rochester too? I wanted to mention this. Oh yeah, I didn't finish that sentence. I thought myself happy. I was surprised to find myself ere long weeping. And why? For the doom which had reft me from adhesion to my master. A very fraught term for us, master, especially when that's what you're calling your lover.
Yeah, you think they'd have moved on from that now, in that their relationship had changed. She was on the verge of becoming Mrs. Rochester.
Yeah.
It's still master.
But for Charlotte Bronte herself, it's just not a fraught term at all. She likes that kind of relationship. She wanted that kind of relationship in her life with Constantine Heger, the teacher from Brussels she fell in love with. And then she writes a novel inspired by that, and it's called The Master, and it's a love story about a teacher and a student. And now and then she changed that, and it was The Professor, and then it didn't get published anyway because it's not very good. And then she wrote this extraordinary novel, which also has some of those things in it from her real life and then from that novel. But and people don't know that then The Professor, she does rewrite it as Villette, the last novel she published in her life. So she does wind up reworking that whole novel and creating a new one out of it, but the basic storyline is still there in Villette in a sense. But just the idea of the master, and that's still a quite acceptable for Charlotte Bronte romantic relationship. So older man in charge, but completely devoted to you. But I guess the twist here, as long as he acknowledges that she is completely equal and free.
That's the
then you're not a master, right? If I'm free, you're not. So it's.
But she is definitely drawn to that sort of power dynamic that, like you say, the master pupil or master servant.
Yeah, I mean, she's okay with it as long as it's like it's benevolent. It's clearly benevolent master. She's not. I mean, she's not. It's not like some kinky S&M thing here she's talking about. It's he's just in charge because of his position in society, and now we're equals, but she's still saying master. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is something kinky going on. Yeah, that's what the fan fiction's for, right? That's how
I was going to say. That would be the 50 Shades of Grey.
That's how Twilight. That's how 50 Shades of Grey happens. Is rewrites these things. So there you go. St. John visits, and St. John brings a color box, pencils, and paper, so she can get on with being the artist. You talked about this some before about the position and how women are especially portrayed as artists in novels. And then this is very big in Senator Wildfeld Hall, of course, Anne Bronte's novel too, but. As people keep commenting on her art and how wonderful it is, and we know Charlotte Bronte herself, it was a very accomplished part of her life, and she won prize at least once for her artwork, and thought maybe she would pursue that before writing. Why is being an artist so important for not only a woman in regular society, but how does that then reflect itself in novels, and especially this one? There's a big question you can tackle.
Yeah, I suppose to condense it down, it's a great way for writers to sort of show heroines sort of their internal workings of their mind in a way that that it can be something put down on paper that's so intrinsically linked to them, their thoughts, feelings. It's like totally revelatory content in a way that the art that you produce is so linked to who you are as a person. It's a great sort of character device, and especially sort of how you hone or harness that talent. So it comes up so frequently in 18th and 19th century novels, because it would be a legitimate sort of ladylike pastime to have your pencils or watercolors,
and that's part of it, because that kind of respectability thing, and it makes you kind of it elevates you it elevates Jane in a sense as a character, which I really notice, constantly. But it is also that it's helped revealing her too, as you were saying too, right?
Yeah, it's completely her, and you get a sense of who she is as a person from her artwork. Like those watercolors we were talking about at the start of the show are so enigmatic, so idiosyncratic. No one else could have painted those, and that's what we get in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall as well. That Helen's artwork is so intrinsic to her. The style, it's almost like handwriting, in that those pictures are dangerous because it could promote or reveal where she's moved and fled to, because it's so distinctive a person's artwork to them, that she doesn't need, she can sign it with a false name, put that it's a false location of the landscape she's producing, and even then it's still a little bit risky, in that the hand would reveal whose work it is, and I think that's so to forget that in Anne Bronte, it's something that Charlotte's drawing on as well, that it's something intensely personal to you, but there's so much sort of societal rules and expectations around what women are drawing, that you can play around with that too. Sort of in terms of the romantic attachments, it can sort of betray who you're thinking about or who you're attracted to if you're drawing them, whose drawings are in your possession. This whole sort of trade in portraiture, there's a lot of sort of gazing going on. Who is it suitable for you to be looking at for that, with that sort of scrutiny for a period of time? And if you're looking at somebody's features, the physiognomy comes in again. You can be like using that time to read someone's character and think, are they someone aligned with your own views? And it's that those sort of moments of drawing, and especially portraiture, sort of are so loaded with references to sort of previous novels that Bronte would have been attuned to and familiar with. That there's a whole tradition of, if someone's drawing a portrait or has that portrait in a possession, it's sort of got those romantic connotations. She knows all that, and then sort of can play with it here in terms of what Jane's doing. And I remember talking about that before, when Rochester's looking through her portfolio, it kind of subverts that whole idea, because he's not finding pictures of him. It's these really strange, weird watercolors that kind of confound him and think, what's going on in your mind if this is what you're producing? But in a way, that's what appeals to him. It's like, this person's really different, and that I like that. That
was the word that I was going to ask you. Like, is this also a subversive, thing for women to do in the way that Jane is pursuing it, especially in this kind of fully expressive of herself? Now, I'm not just making a nice little landscape portrait copying kind of thing, that she's really expressing things, individuality and emotion and intensity that should be dangerous for some people.
Exactly. So the arts are acceptable to a certain point. If you're following your artist's manual of just copying how to draw a landscape, or you're copying a famous print that's popular and doing the rounds, and you're just basically reproducing what's been done before, or just painting your sister or something. It's very innocuous and acceptable, but there's a line that can easily be crossed. It's sort of, painting is this great skill that can be drawn on to fill leisure time, or this talks about when Jane can't be lonely because she's painting, so it has that sort of function as well, sort of meditative function, sort of organize your thoughts and feelings, which is all very well and good, but it becomes a time when it can go too far, and it is a skill that you could draw. Say if you did fall on hard times, you could attempt to sell your artwork, but then that's so fraught. If you painted something so personal and attempt to sell it, it sort of has those taints of prostitution, that you're selling your wares, you're selling yourself. So it can easily tip over. You can be too go too far and show too much about yourself through
a lot of that. You'll find the tenant of Wildfell Hall too, and novel. A lot of those issues are really in that one. All righty. Well, let me also right now, let me give a little mid-break message here to everyone that we bring Sundays with Jane Eyre to you for free. So if you'd like to support Rosenbach through donation, you can do so at our website. And since this novel was published in 1847, we're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show. And we love being able to put on Sundays with Jane Eyre for you every week. Takes a lot of time and work, obviously, from everyone here. And we would like you to please consider a gift to help us reach our goal of $2,500 to produce the next Sundays with series, the next show that we're going to do. And so we can keep that show free and accessible to everyone. I want to thank some people who have donated over the last week. Audrey B. in Wyoming, PA, Kyle C. and Marilyn S. in Philadelphia, PA, Amy W. in New York, and Gail K. in Los Angeles, California. Thank you all for donating. You could also become a member of the Rosenbach. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, 10% off of any of our reading courses, 50% off of any of our paid programs. And there are lots of great programs and courses coming up. The April to June schedule has been released. It's online now, where members can start signing up this week. I think it's Wednesday. And then general public a week after that. You can go to our website and see all the fun new programs and courses we have there. And we still have some Sundays with Jane Eyre merchandise, mugs, t-shirts, and stickers. Again, I say that's one reason I'm wearing my shirt today. After 23 weeks now and counting, we're coming to the end of the show next month. We are not only grateful to everyone who has joined since the program began in September, but for the new people who are even joining now. You guys have watched, you guys have shared, you guys have loved the series. So in thanks for your support, we are offering a special discount on the Jane Eyre merchandise we still have. All Bronte stores and Airheads can use a code to receive 20% off the member discount, regardless of your membership status. And we'll be sending out the Rosenbach will be sending out an email with that code tomorrow. And as an added bonus for our members, you can use the code for an additional 10% off. So it's not, you would normally get a discount. You'll even get 10% more, and everyone, even if you're not a member, you get 20% off. So look for our email tomorrow from the Rosenbach. This offer is good only while supplies last. The shirts will run out, the mugs will run out. So don't wait until it's over. When you get the code, if you want a shirt or a mug and stickers, use it while you can still get them. Upcoming co-hosts next week, Ghoul Guides, Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going will be back. I can't wait for that. And March 20th, Kathleen Hudson will come back. And then on March 27th, Rowan Coleman returns, author of the Bronte Sisters Mysteries. We'll be back again for another show. Have you read any of those yet, Hannah, any Rowan
I haven't.
Colville?
I was listening into Rowan's show last week, and that brought them to my attention. So yeah,
I'm loving Vanished Bride so far. So,
sounds great.
Highly recommend. All right, everyone, back to the chapter. St. John has visited. He's brought her some art supplies, and they have this. Their exchanges are really odd because I can't help but think of how different they are from when Jane and Rochester are talking. Because when St. John comes in and Jane's crying, and he's, he doesn't he says, "Oh, you're still upset," and instead of, he's okay with her not talking about why so much, and then he can give a little sermon about, don't be like Lot's wife and blah blah blah. Really, that's not helping. That's his answer. Like Rochester would have gotten her to open up, like what she always did. He's like, "Tell me what you're really feeling. Tell me what you're really feeling." And St. John's not interested in that. St. John's interested in, her, this kind of, giving her biblical advice. But maybe this is his plan too, because just as Rochester had a plan to get her Jane to fall in love with him, St. John has a plan here to get her to be, the more mission-driven Christian that he is. So that's his language here, and but then it leads him to open up. It's odd because he doesn't get Jane to open up; he opens up.
I think Jane's quite adept at that. She talks about it at one point in this chapter about how she plans to draw him into conversation and get him talking, and uses her art for that. So I think she's quite adept at reading people and getting more out of them, whereas St. John doesn't really have a clue. It's kind of like, "Oh no, someone's crying. There, get on with it. We'll move on." And
Rochester before wanted to, like Jane wanted him to open up, but he's like dying to tell her these things about himself. So, but she does get him though, and then she'll use the painting in the next chapter to get him to open up too. But here it's just, she's asking him, and then he starts to talk about how his life, that he was, how intensely miserable he was when he became when he first becomes the clergyman, that he wants out of the life that he set up for himself. And he feels inside he has the destiny of an artist, author, orator, anything rather than that of a priest. Yes, the heart of a politician, of a soldier, of a votary of glory, a lover of renown, a luster after power, beat under the curate's surplice.
I find that really funny because it's the last thing you'd think of St. John being is sort of a romantic artist figure.
Yeah.
There's a really clear picture we all have in mind when you say artist, thanks to the literary tropes of sort of a male artist being sort of really volatile and emotional, like the opposite of St. John, who's very reserved and straight-faced and is going to hide it all and keep all his emotions in. You're not going to get him laying his heart out onto a canvas. So I always found that quite funny that he's taken the wrong direction.
Even in the profession that he has, he doesn't lay it out there. There's all this like tight reserve when he's preaching. It's intense, but he can't quite release himself. But he is very ambitious, and he wants to do something grand. And I mean, he's like that romantic artist kind of way, or the Victor Frankenstein kind of way. Like, I want to do something that's going to like shake up the world. And St. John feels that for himself. And his answer is to be a missionary. It is far more admirable in the 19th century, especially the kind of missionary he is. He wants to go out into the savages of the world and teach them the true light of Christ. Not really go out and help them in any way, just teach them the true light of Christ so they would go to heaven. And but obviously, but it's a very colonialist endeavor for the 19th century, for somebody like Charlotte Bronte to admire this endeavor that, we're helping these people. It's super cringeworthy now. That
very much. It's sort of the white savior complex that
yeah,
he thinks he can go out there
and that we're supposed to admire Rivers through to the very end of this novel. We're supposed to admire him for doing this, and it's not anymore. So that's all I have to say on that. But the Jane's response, she sees him, she says someone else arrives. And at first it's just, good evening, Mr. Rivers. We're not told who he is, but Jane notices that, he's immediately affected. He had started at the first of those musical accents as if a thunderbolt had split a cloud over his head. And then this vision appears at his side. She calls it a vision, as it seemed to me, had risen at his side, Jane says. Youthful, graceful form, full yet fine in contour, a face of perfect beauty. Perfect beauty is a strong impression. I love this. But I do not retrace or qualify it as sweet features as ever the temperate clime of Albion molded. And it's Rosamund. It's Rosamund. Oliver has shown up, and St. John's all aflutter over it, but won't admit it. It kind of doesn't even look at her.
To it, she can sort of sense that.
Yeah.
That what she's going to see before she's seen it, sort of thing. In seeing St. John's reaction, and it is in such supernatural terms that she describes it happening. It's quite angelic in a vision. I think she uses the term like a piri, which is really interesting from Persian mythology.
Yeah,
and so quite a benevolent but mischievous sort of sprite that's very beautiful.
And it's the most fulsome complimentary portrait of a woman in this. Not like Jane really goes out of her way. It's this long list, about describing every bit of her features. And usually usually it's a far more blunt assessment. And usually it's very keyed into physiognomy. And here it's not so much. Here it's all about aesthetic beauty, isn't it?
And it is like she's taking note to draw her, how she sort of contours
already
the nose and the cheeks. It is like she's taking notes to paint her portrait and sees her as this ideal model, and very much lined with St. John, who has been described as this male ideal.
Yeah,
he's also which you don't often think of him being an attractive character, especially sort of from adaptations. He's kind of swept away as kind of the dreary curate person, and is not sort of seen as this specimen of manhood who is the ideal, whereas Rochester's a bit craggy and rugged. He's meant to be sort of,
and she can't help but call him ugly all the time. She loves calling him ugly. You're so ugly, and they love that about each other. So
but then St. John and Rosamund are just these two perfect specimens of beauty and perfection.
When St. John in the last chapter first sees Jane and the sisters when she's still not just recovering, and he's like, oh, she's not very good looking, and I'm like, St. John, don't say that to her. She loves that when men say that to her.
But it's so blunt and sort of unnecessary. Like, why do you need to comment on people in those terms? But Jane does it herself. She's always sort of matching people, and we've seen it before with the previous sort of feminine ideal has been, well, the closest to it has been Blanche, who she heard a lot about before she saw, and there's that whole section where she even
creates a picture, right?
Yeah, she has a piece of ivory ready to sort of draw this ideal portrait of her from her imagination and what she's heard of this sort of perfect woman, and sort of place it side by side with Rochester, almost like she's playing sort of with paper dolls, that she's sort of matchmaking through art, that these people, sort of convincing herself that these people belong together, they share these characteristics, and sort of shoehorning in them into sort of aesthetic categories where she doesn't see herself fitting.
And it is interesting that she doesn't bother to do the physiognomical read. I don't know how to go that word there, of her, but does it more in these art terms. And then that's what she winds up doing. She winds up creating art from Rosamund.
I think she's very honest about how her appearance is perfect, but doesn't necessarily say that aligns with the perfect sort of human character. She acknowledges her flaws as well, and sort of says that she has been spoiled, but not to an excess.
Yeah.
She's probably sort of
But she's
very
not
aware of her privilege.
But she's not condemnatory of her. She's not,
No.
and basically what it is all the time. We'll get more in this night, but she's not Blanche Ingram, and she recognizes that right off the bat. So it's okay that she's beautiful because
she's a lot nicer person than
not mean.
Than Blanche.
Yeah, you can be a beauty, but you can't be a bitch. Like she's fine because you're not, mean to everybody, and so yeah. More towards the end of that chapter, before she leaves, Rosamond is patting the dog's head, bending with native grace before his young and austere master. And then here, this is where Jane's noticing. I saw a glow rise to that master's face. Master again, this is St. John. I saw his solemn eye melt with sudden fire and flicker with resistless emotion. But then he curbed it, I think, as a resolute rider would curb a rearing steed. He responded neither by word nor movement to the gentle advances made him. I mean, Jane recognizes that this is what he's been hiding all along, that he has this love for Rosamond, and he's been trying to keep that under control. She says he's almost like an automaton here in responding to her. He won't go to visit her. She's like, come to our house. Like, no, I can't. And the chapter ends with this line from Jane: this spectacle of another's suffering and sacrifice wrapped my thoughts from exclusive meditation on my own. Diana Rivers had designated her brother inexorable as death. She had not exaggerated. But this idea, too, that Jane recognizes the suffering and sacrifice of St. John, this is her, they're alike in some way. They're both going through a period in life right now of great sacrifice, that they can't have the love that they want. And they both had to make a choice to say no to that. So
maybe Jane recognizing those emotions herself and the struggle with it sort of makes her recognize it in somebody else, and become resolute to try and draw him out of himself and help a little bit.
And a way to make us empathize with St. John a little too. I mean, it is true. I mean, but of course the great difference is he doesn't have to, but we'll get to that. Like, you don't have to sacrifice this, St. John, but he feels like he does.
I think at this point, I know me personally, I did start, like, I've never liked St. John at all, and then coming back to this chapter and reading about his sort of feelings for Rosamond, I did sort of start to feel
authors will trick you. Yeah, they'll trick you.
You do wonder, especially when sort of comparisons are made to Jane.
Yeah.
Because you think Jane is the narrator of her story. We're all sort of drawn into her and really admire her as a character and sort of feel for her and what she goes through. And if we've got sort of so many similarities being pointed out to us between her and St. John, but yet St. John's this person that doesn't get a tar sympathy, and lots of readers really hate him, especially sort of if you're sort of comparing to Rochester, who is the better match. With sort of it's sort of Rochester all the way, and St. John sort of pales in comparison, even though he's sort of been described as being like really good looking and all this. His character doesn't make up for it. He's sort of so stern and stoic that he's unappealing. And I was sort of wondering about that if we are being invited to draw comparisons between St. John and Jane, how can we hate St. John and love Jane? I sort of wonder if it is to do with how much we're let in, because Jane is sort of revealing herself to us, being really honest and emotional, sort of recording this as if writing an autobiography, whereas St. John is this stoic statue of a man who just goes through the motions of an automaton, and we're not given that emotional insight to what's going on inside. Whether that's sort of putting up a barrier to us as readers, and that's why we're sort of turned off.
And Jane believes that kind of inner passion, that inner emotion, is something that is important and should be expressed, It's just that because Rochester's done this awful thing, she can't have it. So but it is, you're supposed to do that. And St. John's answer is no.
Yeah, those descriptions of an automata are really interesting, because it's come up once before where I think Jane said that she is not an automata. Like, she doesn't sort of act in a sort of set programmed way. She is sort of a free, independent being. Whereas she's in St. John's, she sees this sort of emotionally repressed person who's not going to get out of life what he wants to, because he's so determined that he's got to suffer ready for the next life.
Yep. All righty. Chapter 32, or volume 3, chapter 6, we get a little more about Jane now is learning about her students. I continued the labors of the village school as actively and faithfully as I could. It was truly hard work at first, but they really surprise her. The students work really hard. They start to learn. She says, they won both my goodwill and my admiration. This kind of is nice. This makes up for, and she recognized it too, that like, I'm thinking in snobbish terms and I need to not. And she's proven right that they do this. They do impress her. They are as smart as anybody can be with the right instruction. And she starts to involve herself in their lives. She goes home to the farmer's house, and they treat her really well, and they're and they feel like they're elevated because they've got the smart teacher comes to their house, who can do all these wonderful things and is so brilliant, comes to their house, and she's treated well in the neighborhood, and people greet her with cordial salutations. A part of me wishes, like, I want to see the scene where she goes back to the bread shop and it goes in and says, ha, 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 not begging now. But Jane's not like that. I would have done that, obviously. So
it shows really reciprocal that she's fitting into the community, and she's benefiting them and they're benefiting her, which is a nice picture painted.
And now we get a dream. Oh, I love dreams. This novel. I'm going to read this dream. If you want to move down, it's like halfway through this paragraph. As the paragraph starts, I felt I became a favorite in the neighborhood, but it's halfway down. I used to rush strange dreams.
So I felt I became a favorite in the neighborhood. Whenever I went
go down to halfway. Like, I used to rush into strange dreams.
Here we are. Yeah. I used to rush into strange dreams at night. Dreams many-coloured, agitated, full of the ideal, the stirring, the stormy. Dreams where, amidst unusual scenes charged with adventure, with agitating risk and romantic chance, I still again and again met Mr. Rochester. Always at some exciting crisis, and then the sense of being in his arms, hearing his voice, meeting his eye, touching his hand and cheek, loving him, being loved by him, the hope of passing a lifetime at his side would be renewed with all its first force and fire. Then I awoke. Then I recalled where I was and how situated. Then I rose up on my curtainless bed, trembling and quivering, and then the still dark night witnessed the convulsion of despair and heard the burst of passion. By 9 o'clock the next morning, I was punctually opening the school, tranquil, settled, and prepared for the steady duties of the day.
Dreams of Rochester. And then she wakes up to her ordinary life. So it's even, it's even more affecting to her. But these gorgeous, passionate dreams, and that it sounds like it's like her paintings here that she's dreaming, and she can't let this go, and it's not wrong, and I think she feels that she seems to understand that it's not wrong to feel this way. It's just that she can't go ahead with it because of circumstances.
And maybe it's kind of allowed in her sort of dream world state. She's not sort of doing anything to hurt anybody in real life. She's getting up, sort of facing the day in a sort of very calm, controlled way. And if nobody knows sort of what she's sort of thinking about at night, it's sort of not doing any harm.
we're talking about, her links with St. John, and it's another one, St. John has dreams about Rosamond, and then the next day it's all, nope, now I'm being a clergyman, I'm doing my work, visiting the sick, taking care of people, and they're in the same position in their lives right now.
But I suppose she sees that Rosamond is this kind of perfect woman in many ways, and so sort of perhaps wants to help them come together, because she knows she can't be with Rochester. There are very real barriers to that union, sort of morally.
And here we have it. Here we, and Jane's gonna try to be matchmaker here. She talks about Rosamond visits when Mr. Rivers just happens to be there teaching in his daily catechizing lesson, and
that's wisely not put her off listening to him.
Yeah, I would, and like, why do you like him, Rosamond? But she really does. She feels, she seems to be really attracted to him, that he's good looking, first of all. And we get this from her father. We'll get to that in a little bit. But Jane mentions how, of course, she knew her power. He did not, because he could not conceal it from her. That Rosamond is, coquettish in her ways. She calls her coquettish. She says she was coquettish, but not heartless, exacting, but not worthlessly selfish. So basically, she's not Blanche Ingram. She might be beautiful, but she's not Blanche. And so she's all right with that. And as long as she likes St. John, Jane feels like she could set them up. Jane then describes herself. Oh no, when she goes and visits, Rosamond sees her artwork, and no. Before then, she said, I was like Mr. Rivers. Rosamond tells Jane that she's like Mr. Rivers, only certainly she had not 1/10 so handsome. But Jane describes herself. She says, I was a lusus natura, this kind of freak of nature.
Yeah,
like very singular person, she affirmed, as a village schoolmistress. She was sure my previous history, if known, would make a delightful romance. So I love that little
She's not wrong there.
Yeah, a little meta moment here in the novel that, like, boy, wouldn't you make a great book? Yeah, it is. And and people are reading it. Then she notices her art materials and her little pictures, and she says, she asked Jane if she would sketch a picture of her. This kind of, and I love this expression from Jane here, if you could comment on this. With pleasure, I replied, and I felt a thrill of artist delight at the idea of copying from so perfect and radiant a model. Jane's an artist. That's like, it's right there, right? And she knows she is.
It's part of her being, and she recognizes that it's how she sees herself, and it sort of links back to that initial description of Rosamond, where she's looking at her face as like an artist making preparatory sketches, and now sort of skills been recognized, and she's been called on to actually produce this portrait. So I think she's proud that she's got someone's attention and feels flattered, and has this, like we say, how saying about St. John's always described in terms of references to sculpture and art. We've got it again here with Rosamond.
True, thank you for pointing that out. That is the way that's the way she describes him too. She's the artist in this whole section. She's the artist. When she's in Thornfield, it's all about reading character in people. And this whole escapade here, everybody she looks at, she's describing in these artistic, aesthetic terms.
Definitely. So it's really coming to the fore. She's got sort of the space to practice, I suppose, that we're not being bogged down with sort of flirtatious discourse with Rochester, or working out who Bertha or Grace Poole are. We're getting more into not only who Jane is, but how she sees other people in artistic.
And the new identity, and because she specifically needs it, and she wants a new identity, she needs a new identity in moving on in her life now. And before she was Jane Eyre the governess, and now she's Jane Elliott, village school mistress, artist. So she draws the picture of her, and it looks so great that Rosamond has to bring her home and show her dad, and it's really nice little scene. Like, her dad isn't condescending jerk to her. He's, they admire it, and she is, and indeed, cried Rosamond, she is clever enough to be a governess in a high family, Papa.
So this again, they're sort of not expecting her to sort of waste her talents at the village school in a way, which is a shame when she's making some real difference to people's lives. And
of course, the naivete of the Olivers to think that being a governess, as Charlotte Bronte knows, being a governess in a high family is no fun.
No.
but the irony,
seen as more status.
But the irony of the novel is that that's exactly what I just ran away from. So Mr. Oliver reveals the importance of the Rivers family in the neighborhood, and it's an old name, and they used to be the most wealthy, and the way he talks about St. John, Jane recognizes that, he'd happily let Rosamond marry St. John. He'd be completely fine with that. He wouldn't see it as you're marrying the poor clergyman with no money. You're marrying, a very respectable name and a very intelligent, good person. So it was the 5th of November and a holiday. What holiday would that be? We don't have that in America. What holiday?
Bonfire night.
Yeah.
So
Guy Fawkes Day, right?
Fawkes, this failure to blow up the Houses of Parliament.
Yeah, we don't celebrate that. Have you always celebrated that? Was that something you've grown up with?
Yeah, so it's still a big thing.
Still is, right? Yeah.
In that, so it used to be. I think the tradition started with having sort of a fake sort of mannequin of a guy that you would sort of make almost like a scarecrow kind of figure, effigy, using old clothes and things, and put on the bonfire as Guy Fawkes. That has dropped out a bit, but we still sort of have the bonfires and fireworks.
I like it burning it. It's like very pagan, like turning the Wicker Man, creepy thing going on. But yeah. And is it like, is it just a festive thing? Is everybody partying, or is it just focused on a ritual thing that's done, or is it like most holidays become just holiday?
It's a good question. I think it is more perhaps about the festivity. You perhaps sort of lose a bit of the idea that you're burning a wannabe terrorist figure. Yeah. It has gone more into sort of, it's dark, dreary nights of November. You'll have a bonfire and fireworks, maybe some
nice
rides, toffee apples and things, and you have more those festivity aspects. So
it's a little Halloween-like in that it's that time of the year, but it's not focused
Halloween
on,
a bit.
Yeah, and it's not the scary stuff as much, because that's Ghost Story for Christmas time. You save your ghost stories for Christmas. I like to do that too. Well, that's where they're celebrating here. It's not, she doesn't mention anything about it though, just that it was 5th of November and a holiday.
That's the thing. I thought that, but sort of reading it back just there, that they don't sort of mention any sort of village festivities or anything, or whether she's just keeping herself out of it at home reading.
I wonder what they did in Haworth too. I wonder what the Brontes did. I wonder if that was a regular Haworth thing. I'll have to look. I'm sure I could find that out. How they celebrated the 5th of November those years. Maybe they weren't allowed. I don't know. I wonder if it would have been you can't celebrate that. That's the village. You're the curate's daughters. I wonder. Yeah,
it seems to be. You think there'd at least be sort of a bonfire for people to sort of gather around. It'd be interesting to look into, because it is just sort of swept over.
Well, Jane's not celebrating. The kids are off celebrating. It's a holiday, so that gives her time to just sit and read and relax. And she was going to work on completing Rosamond's portrait. We get a description of it here. The head was finished already. There was but the background to tint and the drapery to shade off, a touch of carmine too to add to the ripe lips, a soft curl here and there to the tresses, a deeper tinge to the shadow of the lash under the azure. A very, this is an artist describing, how they're how they're creating their work. And more Jane the artist. And then St. John shows up and he brings a book. And I'm thinking, all right, well, St. John's going to bring a book like Pilgrim's Progress or some other, moral instruction. No, he doesn't. And we'll get to what it is in a second. But first, I love this. Charlotte Bronte goes on this kind of little rant about poetry. Like, people don't read poetry like they used to read poetry. They really don't read poetry like they used to read poetry now, Charlotte, 170 years after you've written. But it is, I love that it talks about the golden age of modern literature. Readers of our era are less favored, but courage I will not pause either to accuse or repine. I know poetry is not dead nor genius lost. I mean, this is, it's out of place. It's Charlotte Bronte wanted to throw this in here. And I really like it. And I'm glad that she did, because the book is Marmion. It's more Scott.
Walter Scott, yeah.
Yeah, more Walter Scott, which I love. And Marmion was the next big poem he wrote after Lay of the Last Minstrel that she quoted from earlier. Massive hit. Everybody bought it. Everybody read it. Is it Marmion like 20,000 copies would sell in a year. It's like, sounds like nothing in today's numbers, but it is. It'd be like selling 20 million copies in a year. It is a massive amount of reader, because the readership is so small then, and everybody's buying Scott and reading Scott and loves him. And for Bronte too, she really connects those early, before the historical novels, but these are Scott's narrative poems, and she connects that with, that's an admirable age of literature. That she's kind of recognizing that this other age of literature is kind of more important than what is now becoming the novel age in the the mid to 19th century and beyond. And Scott himself stopped writing narrative poetry and started writing novels instead. But it is certainly things that Jane loves and that Charlotte wants to tell us about too. But anyway, just a little Scott digression. I got to get back to Rob Roy. I put it down for several weeks now. I got to get back to it. St. John comes in and sees the picture and like just reacts right away. Jane notices, then he pretends he doesn't,
It's hilarious how he like says, "What picture? Who is it?" Like he doesn't recognize it.
Yeah. Who is this? Oh, I don't know. It's a picture you did. I did not observe it closely, he says. And she calls him out on it. You did. And it's Rosamond. And then this is Jane kind of partly trying to draw him out and in a way that she thinks will help him. And also kind of to matchmake in a way. And she's like, well, what if I gave you a copy of this? What if I made another copy? And he denies that is, not something that, he would want. I mean, she's teasing him in a way, and he recognizes that too. But boy, what a difference between the teasing with Rochester again, and now the teasing with St. John is, he can't kind of handle this. Instead, he starts talking about, what does he say? Reserve people off. No, this is Jane thinking about it, but he says that I would like to have it is certain. Whether it would be judicious or wise is another question. And then he just sits and starts looking at, like with his brow supported on both hands, he's just, staring at this picture. And Jane says, reserved people often really need the frank discussion of their sentiments and griefs more than the expansive. So if you're reserved, you need to talk about it. You need, with someone who would understand you. She says, the sternest seeming stoic is human after all, and to burst with boldness and goodwill into the silent sea of their souls is often to confer on them the first of obligations. And I think this is Jane, in a sense, talking about herself, that she is this solitary, lonely being, her silent sea. And it was Rochester burst in upon her silent sea, and she really, that benefited her. She grew from that. That was helpful. And, but for St. John, he says, she says she likes you. So now she's going to draw him out. She's thinking, so he has a silent sea. He's reserved. He's not. But she thinks this. And then she says she likes you. You ought to marry her. Does she like me? He asked.
I think it's really sort of hit on a nerve there that it's piqued his interest. His sort of mask drops a little bit then, because he's been trying so hard to view art how he thinks it should be viewed, in terms of sort of a disinterested connoisseur. So the idea that you'll protect yourself from accusations of bringing your sort of personal opinions into sort of aesthetic criticism by presenting yourself as a disinterested connoisseur who will sort of look at the brush strokes and compare it to other works, and not be looking at things like likeness to somebody you like. And Jane really sort of turns it on his head and sort of says, no, you should be using art for its emotional potential. And she's really sort of drawing on a emotional stimulus, really, that she's put this picture in front of him to provoke a strong emotional reaction, and to appreciate the value in that, and sort of bring about this conversation that's sort of
the function. It says art has a function as well, to help us get in tune with our feelings and who we are, and explore ourselves.
Definitely, I think that's not always valued. I think that's something Bronte really brings to the fore, in that it can be something valuable, and that you can sort of laugh at these sort of tropes of the portrait of a lover is going to sort of cause some sort of reveal sort of truths to a reader. A reader will be sort of expecting St. John to want to keep Rosamond's portrait close to him, as sort of this sort of symbol of his secret love, and he's resisting that, and sort of saying, actually, is it going to do anybody any good to sort of dwell on these feelings?
But he is okay with dwelling on it for a little bit, right? He's like, okay, here's what we'll do. And even gets out his watch, quarter of an hour, 15 minutes. I'm going to look at this and we're going to talk about it. And then he's going to lock it up in the box.
It's so precise that I'll get the watch out. No, not a minute more or less. We've got 15 minutes for you to blast me and tell me.
The picture that he then he talks about, fancying me yielding and melting as I am doing, human love rising like a freshly opened fountain in my mind, and overflowing with sweet inundation all the field I have so carefully and with such labor prepared. Talking about stretched out on the ottoman in the drawing room at Vale Hall at my bride Rosamond Oliver's feet, she talking to me, a sweet voice, smiling at me with these coral lips. I mean, this kind of fantasy world that he then, look, Rochester did this.
It's exactly what we've seen with Jane's dream.
Jane does this. This is, what and Jane's got to be thinking she says, I humored him. The watch ticked. He breathed fast and low. Like, she's got to be thinking like, haha, it's working. Like, this is what you should be doing. And then he shuts it all up, and he just says, no, it is strange. While I love Rosamond Oliver so wildly, she wouldn't make a good wife. Like, I can't do that. He says, because I'm going to be a missionary. And this is where Jane finally turns the tables on him, and I think makes us realize that while they might be alike, Jane recognizes that she has a choice, and he doesn't seem to think he has a choice anymore. He says, because she says, you need not be a missionary. You might relinquish that scheme. And he says, no, that's what I've set up, and that's what I have to pursue now. And won't, must I relinquish that? It is dearer than the blood in my veins. And Jane can't understand this, right? Because Jane's like, no, it's human connection, people, love. That's what should be the most, that's the thing that should be the most important in life. And, but not for him. And it's ironic that he says, it is what I have to look forward to and to live for, when we all know he's just looking to die. He's just looking to martyr himself in quest of being a missionary.
It is all about sort of looking to the next life with St. John. But you do sort of wonder about how deep his love for Rosamond actually is, and whether it is a case of it all being about the surface beauty. That because Jane does sort of identify her as this really beautiful woman, equally matched to St. John's sort of male beauty. Yeah. But do their personalities actually work together? And I think it's making it as sort of reassess sort of Rochester and Jane as these two people who would struggle to ever be apart from each other. They're so aligned. They feel and think on the same terms. Whereas would it be so perfect a match with St. John and Rosamond if they don't really align on anything else in terms of sort of their motivations and values? Maybe it is just a case of sort of the pretty face, and he is attuned to that. He's been sort of lured by her appearances, but recognizes that actually as a wife it wouldn't work. It would be that kind of what Jane has feared as being with a mistress, that it would be a short-term sort of honeymoon period. And I think St. John thinks that similar kind of vein, that it wouldn't last.
He says that, but he also says, but I have to be a missionary. Like, well, which is it? Like, so if she was okay, if she had the mind of Jane, you'd be okay with staying home? No, because then he even still will want to bring Jane off with him. Like, he's completely convinced himself that the mission is more important than him being happy in life and, having a family and doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, you do get the sense that he'll never be happy, because he wouldn't let himself think in those terms of earthly pleasure or delight. He is all about the sacrifice and the punishment and
and when Jane hits him with this, when she just comes out, you're so in love with her, and then he's a little taken aback that Jane would be this on. He says, you are original. There's something brave in your spirit as well as penetrating in your eye. And if he doesn't already have a plan to make Jane the person in his life who'll be his helpmeet, then he certainly, I think, is clued onto it now. But then what Jane is thinking about her silency and how Rochester burst on that now is when he tells Jane, he says, I know it is ignoble about Miss Oliver, and he says, a mere fever of the flesh, not, I declare, the convulsion of the soul. That is just as fixed as a rock, firm set in the depths of a restless sea. Know me to be what I am, a cold hard man. That he feels like his soul isn't a silent sea like Jane felt like hers was. His is a restless sea, and then the rock is his, conviction, his mission, his cold hard reasoning in the midst of this. And he tells Jane, you have taken my confidence by storm. That continued this kind of natural imagery, but this is in some odd way, this is the kind of thing that, looking back on or rereading now for the umpteenth time, this is the thing that convinces me that they can't be together. Like they are actually fundamentally different inside. And so please, Jane, don't.
That's the thing. It's kind of like people have been pointing out all these similarities between them, but it's kind of always quite jarring. You sort of know that there are sort of similar experiences, but it's quite jarring when people like Rosamond say, "Oh, you're just like St. John." You think, no, she's not. Inside,
now we recognize she's not, and so the chapter ends, and he once more he looked at the portrait. And then she's like, do you want me to paint one for you? Cui bono, no. I mean, what good would it do? And then he when he's about to, he drew over the picture of the sheet of thin paper, and then he noticed something that caught his eye. He took it up with a snatch. He looked at the edge, and then he looks at Jane, and then he looks back, and then he tears something off, and Jane says, Jane looks at it and she doesn't know what's going on. The chapter ends, but saw nothing on it. I looked at it and saw nothing on it save a few dingy stains of paint where I had tried the tint in my pencil. And then it's a mystery. So I guess we needed a little mystery for this part of the novel, because it was a big mystery of Thornfield. But what it was is, we're not going to keep it as a spoiler secret. We are going to talk about it next week, but I definitely want to talk about it with you. Because what did he see on this painting?
It's her signature. So she's taken the decision to sign her work, which is in itself almost quite a radical statement in claiming ownership, because a lot of work goes unsigned through history. So it's quite making a declaration of Jane Eyre as artist, that she's putting her name to these pieces. And of course, if you see the name Jane Eyre on the edge, it's not Jane Elliot. So you can know why I'd be really annoyed though if he ripped a bit off my work, even if it was the edge.
No.
And taking the provenance away, it's now not signed.
Yeah,
it's causing damage there. But no, it's really interesting that that's the giveaway. When we've been talking about how intrinsic her work is to her sense of self and what she reveals about herself, it all comes together in this idea of signing it. She's put her name to it, and that in the end is the giveaway of who she is. It's her art.
Yeah, they reveal her identity, and then they'll find out next, that's related and all this, but the, and also the idea of too that as an artist signing her work, it's a statement of, this is who I am. And that's Jane all over in her kind of, asserting her own identity as she does throughout this novel. And it winds up being a moment of revelation for the plot and for those around her too, which is interesting. And that's a great way to tie that artist part of Jane into this novel too, I think.
Definitely. And I really like how you described this section as sort of Jane as an artist, it's sort of becoming more linked to her identity after having to leave so much of herself behind and sort of try and disguise or change herself after leaving Thornfield. I think that's a great way of thinking of it, that she's still an artist and can lay claim to that.
And laying claim to it will help her. It helps her to a fortune, and then getting everything that she wants. So sorry, it's not spoiling out. Jane wins in the end. So, well, thank you for talking about this with me today, Hannah. This has been really great.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Bronte Stores and Airheads, thank you all for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website, and it's on our YouTube channel as well. If that's how you're watching, thank you for watching there. We have a Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook group where we can continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook and join in that conversation. And you can always go to the YouTube account, like the Jane Eyre videos, subscribe to the channel, leave comments there as well. That's really great. Thanks to Brianna, who was our chat Mrs. Fairfax today, for managing the links in the chat. Next week on episode 24, the Ghoul Guides will return. Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going for volume 3, chapter 7 or chapter 33, when we get so many revelations. It's like the revelation chapter about Jane's uncle, the Rivers family, somebody gets rich. That's all happening. So everybody gets rich. You're all rich in the next one. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out our other virtual offerings we have. The Rosenbach's also open to visits. People in the building all day today. They were walking down, taking tours, doing all kinds of stuff. It's a lot of fun to have this open. You can go to our website and see how you can come and visit us. And please support the Rosenbach, which you do by donation. We're trying to reach our goal of $2,500 for this program so that we can go on and spin it into another program. We're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show, but any donation is more than welcome. And if you're not already a member, I invite you to join. And stay tuned and look in your email tomorrow. You get an email from the Rosenbach with the code to buy merchandise like this great shirt or this mug or our stickers. But I don't have a sticker here, but it's got this on it. And 20% off everyone for it. And if you're a member, 10% on top of that. So look for that code tomorrow in the email, and let's move out the rest of this merchandise. It's all for you. It all supports the show. It all supports the Rosenbach. Hannah, thank you again.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing next week's show.
Excellent. I hope we can do something together in the future. That would be really nice.
Yes, I'll look forward to hearing what the next Sundays will
Good. And
be.
you're welcome to watch the rest of the show. You should definitely tune in for the last one. So.
Oh, I definitely will. Yeah, I'll listen in.
All right, everyone, playing us out over the credits will be Pleated Gazelle's Secrets. Farewell, readers. May you live entirely for and with what you love best on earth. Thank you. Unlike St. John, he never takes that advice. So, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.